Well, welcome to this week's Sofa Sermon. We are in our third week on our messages on the Messiah. You may remember last week that one of the things that I shared, I know I shared it in Common Ground. I don't know if it made it to the Sofa Sermon tape, but as I looked at the gospel accounts of Jesus, and I kind of asked this question, what did Jesus consistently do that demonstrated that he was the Messiah? And I came up with four things. There may be others, and other people may have different ways of wanting to display or interpret that. But for me, it was this. He healed the sick. He taught with authority. He performed miracles. And he revealed the kingdom. And so today, in this week, what I want to look at is an example of when he healed the sick and how that displayed who he was as the Messiah. So I want to read to you from Matthew chapter 9, beginning in verse 14. I would say it's a story, and it is a story, but it's sort of a collection of people's lives that get intertwined in this narrative of Jesus going about and healing different people. And so beginning in verse 14, it says this, "And then John's disciples came and asked him, 'How is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but your disciples do not fast?' Jesus answered, 'How can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? For the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making the tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into new wineskins, and both are preserved.' And while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt before him and said, 'My daughter has just died, but come and just put your hands on her, and she will live.' Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. And she said to herself, 'If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed.' And Jesus turned and saw her and said, 'Take heart, your faith has healed you.' And the woman was healed at that very moment. When Jesus entered the synagogue leader's house and saw the noisy crowd and people playing pipes, he said, 'Go away, the girl is not dead but asleep.' But they laughed at him, and the crowd had to be put outside. And then he went in, took the girl by the hand, and she got up. And news of this spread throughout all the region." All right, so one of the things that demonstrated Jesus was the Messiah was the healing of the sick. And here we have two different people healed, and it's bookended by other things. There are kind of an interesting mix of characters in this play. First of all, you have John's disciples who come, and they are seemingly upset, or at least questioning Jesus, saying to him, "Why is it that your disciples avoid or don't practice one of the most important religious practices that we have? I mean, the Pharisees do this, and so do we. We fast, and your disciples don't fast." And Jesus says, a couple of things, but he ends up having a discussion with them or trying to teach them a little bit about what's going on here. And one of the things that he says, it almost seems disconnected, but then you got to get it. It says, you don't pour new wine into old wineskins, because if you do, it'll burst and you lose the container and you lose the wine too. You pour new wine into new wineskins. And so it's interesting that it's there, that it's a part of this story that connects like three different settings and three different groups of people. And what's interesting to me are some of the details that the gospel writers choose to include. Here Matthew says that Jesus was talking to John the Baptist's disciples. He's answering their questions. He's talking to them about putting a patch on new cloth, and he's talking about new wine into new wineskins. And then it says this, you got to catch this phrase. "And while he was saying this, a synagogue leader came and knelt and just basically begged, asking Jesus to come and heal his daughter." Here's what I think is true about that. I think it's interesting. Matthew wants us to know that happened as Jesus was saying this particular thing. What was he saying? You put new wine into new wineskins, and then both are preserved. Why is that important? Just as he's saying that, a member of the old guard, a keeper, if you will, of the old wine, comes and kneels at Jesus' feet and says, "If you will just come and put your hand on my daughter, she will be made well." Now what's going on here? John the Baptist's disciples are very concerned that Jesus and his men are not practicing a religious ritual or practice. They're not fasting. A guy who would teach about fasting more than anybody else, the synagogue leader, comes in and he doesn't care who's fasting and who's not fasting because his daughter has died. The old wine is asking the new wine to do something that only the new wine can do, and he disregards all other attachments to the old thing. He doesn't care if Jesus is fasting. He doesn't care if Jesus is eating chocolate all day long. He doesn't care anything about that. All he knows is that the old wine has no power to heal his daughter, but the new wine does. So a member of the old guard comes in there. So it's interesting that Matthew said, just as he was saying this, God has this ability, doesn't he, to orchestrate details and flow of events that just as we're picking up the phone, somebody walks in our office, or just as we turn the corner, we see an old friend, and it was important that we see them. I mean, God has a way of doing timing. But what's interesting is this happens twice. So Jesus immediately says, yes, I'll go with you. He gets up and he starts to go, and just as he's starting to go, here's what Matthew says. And just then, okay, right at that moment, just then, a woman who's had an issue of blood for all these years, the other Gospels record some of the details a little more clearly, but one of them was that she had gone to a number of doctors and she had spent all of her money. She was as desperate as they get. Guess what? She doesn't care who's been fasting either. She doesn't care whether or not Jesus and his disciples have been following the rules of the synagogue. She doesn't care. What she knows is that this Messiah has healing in his hands. And she says to herself, if I could just touch the edge of his garment, if I could just touch the edge of his cloak, then I could be healed. She is not worried about the religious rules or following the rituals. She's concerned more about a deeper heart issue. And here's what I want to say about that. I think we all need to be aware of those moments when we are so committed to the rituals that we are accustomed to, the habits of our faith, that they come to a point where we're so committed to them and paying attention to them that God could step in the room and do something new and we would miss it. Listen, rituals aren't bad. I don't mind rituals. I have rituals. We all do. Our church has rituals. But listen, rituals should never be the point. The rituals are what point us to the point, which is that Jesus is alive among us, and he's the Messiah. He's risen. He's still with us, and he's still doing things. Genuine faith is not about robotically following the rules. It's not about robotically just almost in a mind-numbing, zombie-like fashion, following the rules that have been established. It's knowing when the ritual should take a back seat to his presence and when he's doing something new. Power doesn't come from being good at following rituals. It comes from recognizing the activity of the Messiah. Man, I can't wait to get to Sunday to fully unpack this. I want to remind you that these are here for you on Sunday mornings for those of you that are still continuing to stay home, or for maybe when you're away on the weekend. They're always released on Sunday morning at 8:30, and they're just to give you something to consider and pray about and think about. But remember that the full package, I can't be delivered till Sunday, and that video will come out on like Monday or Tuesday. Hope you'll come back and watch and hear everything else, because God's still working in my heart. This is Thursday when I record this. He's still working in my heart. So my question for all of us is this: how hung up are we on rituals? And at what point should we say, we've done it that way forever. This is important to me. I like it. It's what makes me comfortable. But I see God at work, and he's doing something new, and I want to make sure I'm drinking new wine and putting it into a new wineskin to fully embrace all that the Messiah is doing in our midst today. Question for me, for all of us at our church right now, is this: where do we see God at work? And are there any habits or routines or rituals that we're really hanging on to that might be getting in the way of who he wants us to be? Oh, the Lord is speaking. The Lord is working. We're so grateful for all that he does. Thank you for being a part of this week's Sofa Sermon. I pray for God's richest blessings on your life this week.